Alright, so I did my project on the prohibition of alcohol. For the overall historical aspects of the alcohol prohibition, it all started with the Temperance Act, which was in the 19th century. It was people began to perceive the negative effects of alcohol, and it was known that alcohol was disrupting families, it was disrupting societies, and it was looked at in not a positive light. It was looked at in just drunken fools walking the streets, ruining everything. They began the temperance movement to promote total abstinence of the use of alcohol. The American Temperance Society, founded in 1826, began gathering pledges of abstinence. Within 3 years, more than 200 anti-liquor organizations were active, and by 1830, the temperance reform constituted a burgeoning national movement. In 1840s, the Washington Temperance Societies conducted revival-style meetings, and this encouraged similar pledges. The groups were viewed as the nation's growing cities. They were filled with Irish immigrants, Jewish immigrants, Italian, and German. These were the people that were brand new to this country. They were going to the cities because that's what had the jobs. That was cheaper. That's just where people went. Because all these new immigrants were coming to America, and they were all drinkers. They were heavy drinkers, and they were what was looked at as the deviants of society. They were looked at as the wickedness to the alcohol consumption. After the temperance movement had really gone underway, the national prohibition movement began. This was also known as the Noble Experiment. They were held by the prohibitionists. They were the ones that felt that alcohol was a dangerous drug that had destroyed the families and the societies. Consequently, they believed it was the responsibility of the government to prohibit its sale. Between 1880 and 1890, a new wave of prohibition settlement had swept the Protestant churches. Because of this, there was an organization called the Women's Christian Temperance Union. There was also the Anti-Saloon League of America and the National Prohibition Party. These people were the prohibitionists that put the pressure on their local politicians for an amendment of the U.S. Constitution. And that was what led to, in January 1919, the 18th Amendment had been passed. This was the amendment that had outlawed the manufacture and sale of alcohol except for industrial use. Prohibition had marked a triumphant goal, and it was a morality towards the middle and upper classes. The threat that had been posted to this culture was from the New Americans. 9 months after the 18th Amendment, there was the Volstead Act. This was the enforcement mechanism to back up this 18th Amendment. After this 18th Amendment had been passed, people didn't want to give up drinking because you can't just snap your fingers and have drinking be gone. There were gangsters, there were these new immigrants, there were people that just like drinking, and it's not just going to disappear. So criminals had flourished, and they had learned that they're going to strive in this business, this underground business. So bootlegging had become very popular. Speakeasies, which were like underground bars, and smuggling, that had just flourished under the direction and dominance mainly of gangsters. And that was mostly in the cities. I have a statistic here. It says that it was estimated that Chicago had approximately 10,000 speakeasies in operation at any given time during the Prohibition, which is just mind-blowing. In Chicago alone, they had at least 10,000 going at all times. There were a lot of opponents against the law. There were a lot of issues. It was very ineffective. They thought it was ineffective. They thought that this represented an unnecessary restriction of personal choice, and there was a massive campaign that was mounted to repeal this amendment, which really did happen in 1933, which was the ratification of the 21st Amendment, and thereafter the temperance movement had just completely really faded away. So overall, for the races and other ethnicities that were involved with this, it was just everybody. Everybody was affected by this. Everybody, it was America as a whole. Anybody that was coming to America, anybody that already lived here. So like I said before, Irish, Italian, German immigrants, the Jewish immigrants that came over, they were looked at in a negative way. But it was already everybody. It was the gangsters. It was anybody that wanted to drink. It was rural areas. It was urban areas. It was found all over. When you ask if the legislation has completed their goal, I would say that yes, they did. Although that there was still drinking, there was still very, very high amount of crime and disturbance. There was still a 30% decrease in drinking of alcohol, which is pretty grand if you ask me. I mean, they got to the point where bootleggers were charging great amounts for their alcohol, and it was kind of crazy. But people weren't willing to give it up. People would pay that amount. People would break the law and do anything they could to get this alcohol and to drink what they wanted. So when it came time for the presidential election, Democrat Franklin Roosevelt ran for president that year, and he won because his main appeal was to end the Prohibition. This was so Americans could get out of the Great Depression. They could have multiple jobs set up for them, which was involved in alcohol, the production, the transportation, anything like that. And that was in 1933 when the Prohibition was completely done. So I think overall their enforcement, I think they did meet their goal. It's impossible to completely scrape out anything. It just is. When a society is that informed with something and that involved, it's not going to just go away. It would take years and years and years of hard punishment in order for that to go away, and I still don't know if it actually would. One thing I also left out that I did want to mention about the motivation, the early motivation was during World War I. There was a temporary prohibition on alcohol to save money for the war and save grain that you would use, to make the alcohol, to feed the armies and feed the families. And this was just for saving money. It was almost like a pre-show. And then, this happened. It was along with the Temperance Act, but mainly it was with religion. It was with the prohibitionists really making an act to stop this drinking. And like I said, I think along with the prohibitionists and the government, I think they met their goal. I think that, for a 30% decrease in alcohol consumption, it was pretty good. And although there was crime, a lot of crime that went along with it, and still there was a lot of alcohol consumption, I think that they did good. And I think that, they met their goal. So that's all I have on my alcohol prohibition report. Yeah, thank you.